The Wishing Pot by Laurence Housman, from the short story collection, A Doorway in Fairyland. Tulip was the son of a poor but prudent mother. From the moment of his birth she had trained him to count 10 before ever he wanted or asked for anything. An otherwise reckless youth, he acquired an intrinsic value through the practice of this habit. Only once, just as he was reaching, but had not quite reached, years of discretion, did his habit of precaution fail him, and this same failure became in the end the opening of his fortunes. Bathing one day in the river, to whose banks the woods ran down in steep terraces, he heard a voice come singing along one of the upper slopes, and looking up under the boughs of cedar and sycamore, he saw a pair of green feet go dancing by, up and down like grasshoppers on the prance. There was such rhythm in them, and such sweetness in the voice, that his heart was out of him before he could harness it to the number 10, and he came out of the water the most natural and forlorn of lovers. Before he was dressed, the green feet and the voice were gone, and before he got home, his health and his appetite seemed to have gone. Also, he pined industriously from day to day, and spent all his hours in searching among the woods by the riverside for his lady of the dear green feet. He did not know so much as the size or color of her face, the sound of her voice alone, and the running up and down of her feet had, as he told his mother, decimated his affections. In his trouble he could think of only one possible remedy, and that he counted well over, knowing its risk. Away in the loneliest part of the forest there lived a wise woman, to whom now and then folk went for help when everything else had failed them. So he had heard tell of a certain wishing pot that was hers, in which people might see the thing they desired most, and into which for a fee she allowed lovers and other poor fools of fortune to look. One thing, however, was told against the virtues of this wishing pot, that though many had had a sight of it, and their wishes revealed to them therein, others had gone and had never again returned to their homes, but had vanished altogether from men's sight, nor had any news ever been heard of them after. There were some wise folk who held that they had only gone elsewhere to seek the fortune that the wishing pot had shown to them. Nevertheless, for the most part, the wise woman and her wishing pot had an ill name in that neighborhood. To a lover's heart risk gives value. So one fine morning Tulip kissed his mother, counted 10, and set out for the woods. Towards evening he came to the house of the witch and knocked at the door. "Good mother," said he, when she opened to him, "I have brought you the fee to buy myself a wish over the wishing pot." "Ay, surely," answered the crone, and drew him in. In one corner of the room stood a great crystal bowl, nearly round. It was, and had a small opening at the top, to which a man might place his eye and look in. To Tulip, as he looked at it, it seemed all colored fires and falling stars, and a soft crackling sound came from it as though heat burned in its veins. It threw long shapes and lustres upon the walls, and within innumerable things writhed and ran and whiffed in the floating of its vapors. "You may have 2 wishes," said the old witch, "a 1 and a 2, and" she said the spell that undid the secret of the pot to the wisher. Then Tulip bent down his head and looked in, counting softly to himself, and at 10 he let the wish go to his lady of the dear green feet. The colors changed and sprang, as though stirred and fed with fresh fuel, and down in the depths of the wishing pot he saw the feet of his beloved go by in twinkling green slippers. As soon as he saw that, he began counting 10 in great haste for the second wish. Oh, to be inside the wishing pot with her, was his thought. Now he had got to 9, and the wish was almost on his tongue, when he caught sight of the old woman's eye looking at him, and the eye had become like a large green spider, with great long limbs that kept clutching up and out again. His heart quiggled to a jelly at the sight, but the green feet lured him so that he still thought how to get to them and yet be safe. Surely, to be in the wishing pot and out by the sound of the next. Angelus became the shape of his wish. He shut his eyes, cried 10 upon the venture, and was in the wishing pot. The little green feet were trebling over the glass with a sound like running water, and he himself began running at full speed, shot off into the wishing pot like a pellet from a pop gun. Nothing could he see of his dear but her wee green feet. But above them, as they ran, he heard showery laughter, and he knew that his lady was there before him, though invisible to the eye. The pot, now he was in it, seemed bigger than the biggest dome in the world. To run all round it took him 2 or 3 minutes. Away in the center of its base stood a great opal knob, like the axle to a wheel, round which he and the green feet kept circling. However much he wished and wished, the green feet still kept their distance, for now he was underscore and underscore the wishing pot wishes availed him nothing. The green feet flew faster than his. The light laugh rang further and further away, right across to the other side of the hall. His lady had passed from him now. The magic fires of the crystal leaped and crackled under his tread. Now it seemed as if his feet ran on a green lawn, out of which broke crocuses and daffodils, and now roses reddened in the track, and now the purple of grapes spurted across the path like spilled wine. The sound of the green feet and the running of overhead laughter as they distanced him in front came nearer and nearer behind him from across the hall. He felt that he must follow and not turn, however beaten he might be. Presently a voice that he knew was his beloved's cried, "Heart that would have me must hatch me. Feet that would find me must catch me. Man that would mate me must match me. Oh, how?" Wondered spent feet and failing heart and reeling brain. He stumbled slower and slower in the race, till presently with quick, innumerable patterings the green feet grew closer, and were overtaking him from the rear. Warm breath was in his hair, lips in a hand. He turned, open-armed, to snatch the mischievous morsel, but all that he clasped was a gust of air, and he saw the green feet scudding out and away on a fresh start before him. Again, with laughter, the voice cried, "Lap for lap you must wind me, equal, before you can find me. You are a lap behind me." Where they raced, the surface of the glass sloped slightly to the upward rise of its walls. Tulip shifted his ground and ran where the footing was leveler towards the center, and the circle began to go smaller, so he began to gain, till the green slippers, seeing how the advantage had come about, shifted also in their turn. Thus they ran on. There were no inner posts to mark the course, only the great opal standing in the center of all formed the pivot of the race, and round it, a great way off, they ran. All at once a big thought came into Tulip's head. He waited not to count 10, but before Green Slippers knew what he was after, he had reached the opal center and was circling it. Then quickly all the laughter stopped. The green feet came twinkling 16 to the dozen, so as to get round the post before him and away. 1 lap, he was before her. 2 laps, he turned again to her coming, and found her falling into his arms. She blossomed into sight at his touch. From top to toe she was there. All rosy and alive he had her in his clasp, laughing, crying, clinging, yet struggling to be free. She made a most endless handful, till Tulip had caught her by the hair and kissed her between the eyes. All round and overhead the magic crystal reared up arches of fire, too, a roof that dropped like rain, while Tulip and his prize sank down, exhausted on the great hub of opal to rest. As he touched it, all the secret wonders of the wishing pot were opened and revealed to his gaze. Crowds and crowds of faces were what he most saw. Everywhere that he turned he saw old friends and neighbors who he thought had been dead and gone, looking sadly and shaking long, sorrowful faces at him. "You, here too, Tulip," they seemed forever to be saying. "Always another, and now you here too." There was the dairyman's wife, who had waited 7 years to have a child, holding a little will-o'-the-wisp of a thing in her arms. Now. And then for a while it would lie still, and then suddenly it would leap up and dart away. And she, poor soul, must up and after it, though. The chase were ever so long. There also was Miller Dick with his broad thumbs, counting over a rich pile of gold, which ever and anon spun up into the air, and went strewing itself like dead leaves before the wind. Then he, too, must needs up and after it, till it was all caught again and added together and made right. There were small playmates of Tulip's childhood, each with its little conceit of treasure. One had a toy, and another a lamb, another a bird, and all of them hunted and caught the thing they loved, and kissed it, and again let go. So it went on, over and over again, more sad than the sight of a Quaker as he twiddles his thumbs. Whenever they were at peace for a moment, they turned their eyes his way. What? You here too, Tulip? Was always the thing they seemed to be saying. While Tulip sat looking at them and thinking of it all, suddenly his lady disappeared, and only her green feet darted from his side and began running round and round in a circle. Then was he just about to set off running after them, when he felt himself caught up to the colored fires of the roof and sent spinning ungovernably through space. Suddenly he was dumped to the ground, and just as his feet were gathering themselves up under him, he heard the Angelus bell ringing from the village below the slopes of the wood. He was standing again by the side of the wishing pot, and the old woman sat cowering and blinking her spider eye at him, too much astonished to speak or move. Tulip looked at her with a pleasant and engaging air. "Oh, good mother, what a treat you have given me," he said. "How I wish I had money for another wish. What a pity it was ever to have wished myself back again." When the old witch heard that, she thought still to entrap him, and answered joyfully, "Why, kind sir, surely, kind sir, if you like it, you shall look again. Take another wish, and never mind about the money." So she said the spell once more, which opened to him the wonders of the wishing pot. Then cried Tulip, clapping his hands, "What better can I wish than to have you in the wishing pot, in the place of all those poor folk whom you have imprisoned with their wishes?" Hardly was the thing said than done. All the children who had been Tulip's playmates, and Miller Dick with his broad thumbs, and the dairyman's wife, were every one of them out, and the old witch woman was nowhere to be seen. But Tulip put his eye to the mouth of the wishing pot, and there down below he saw the old witch, running round and round as hard as she could go, pursued by a herd of green spiders. And there, without doubt, she remains. And now everybody was happy except Tulip himself, for the children had all of them their toys, and the old miller his gold. And as for the dairyman's wife, she found that she had become the mother of a large and promising infant. But Tulip had altogether lost his lady of the dear green feet, for in thinking of others he had forgotten to think of himself. All the gratitude of the poor people he had saved was nothing to him in that great loss which had left him desolate. For his part, he only took the wishing pot up under his arm and went sadly away home. But before long the noise of what he had done reached to the king's ears, and he sent for Tulip to appear before him and his court. Tulip came carrying the wishing pot under his arm, very downcast and sad, for love of the lady of the dear green feet. At that time all the court was in half mourning for the princess royal, who was the king's only child, and the most beautiful and accomplished of her sex, had gone perfectly distraught with grief, of which nothing could cure her. All day long she sat with her eyes shut, and tears running down, and folded hands and quiet little feet. And all this came, it was said, from a dream which she could not tell or explain to anybody. The king had promised that whoever could rouse her from her grief should have the princess for his wife and become heir to the throne. And when he heard that there was such a thing in the world as a wishing pot, he thought that something might be done with it. From Tulip he learned, however, that no one knew the spell which opened the resources of the wishing pot save the old witch woman who was shut up fast forever in its inside. So it seemed to the king that the pot could be of no use for curing the princess. But it was so beautiful, with its shooting stars and colored fires, that when Tulip brought it, they carried it in to show to her. After 3 hours the princess was prevailed upon to open her eyes, and directly they fell upon the great opal bowl. All at once she started to her feet and began laughing and dancing and singing. These are the words that they heard her sing. Lap for lap I must wind you, equal, before I can find you. I am a lap behind you. Tulip, as soon as he heard the sweetness of that voice and the words, pushed his way past the king and all his court to where the princess was. And there, over the heads of the crowd, he saw his lady of the deer, Green Feet, laughing and opening her white arms to him. As she set eyes on his face, the dream of the princess came true, and all her unhappiness passed from her. So they loved and were married too. The astonishment and edification of the whole court, and lived to be greatly loved and admired by all their grandchildren.